throw them, they're going to go a certain distance. What happens if they turn into flour? You know, the consistency of flour, like baking flour, it's not going to go very far.
That's right.
So let's say these rocks that you throw become, break down into flour along that trajectory. They're going to come to a certain point after they've broken down to a certain amount where they stop traveling horizontally.
Yeah, interesting analogy. So that means that the process of that begun wasn't finished by the time the towers were gone, pretty much. How long do you think that this was ongoing? In a way, what you hinted to earlier is that this process might have lingered for a long, long time, and even actually being possibly then related to what you're talking about, the buildings today that are being on these stilts, correct?
Right, possibly. That's just a question of, is that why they put them up on stilts? But knowing that they took down Banker's Trust after they repaired it, and when they started taking it down, the area where they had repaired it was just super, super rusty. It wouldn't explain, it's bizarre how it could indoors be that rusty.
Yeah.
If you look at the top of page 313, you see where the clouds just stopped rolling out and started going up. It's like rising yeast bread. And when the South Tower turned to dust, the dust cloud rolled out a certain distance. You can see on the top page 312. Rolled out a certain distance. Then when the North Tower turned to dust, it rolled out about a block further before it went up. And the towers are about a block apart. So they seem to have rolled out the same distance before going up.
Interesting. So that would basically, what that means is that the process of the disintegration happened first, and then the further out they came, basically this process continued. And I guess, do you know if this is basically a residue effect of the particles themselves, that let's say that they were, in some way they interacted with an energy source, and basically that begun a disintegration process, which made them, basically flow out carrying with the wind pretty much, and then that process of disintegration continued? Or do you think that they hit another level, I guess, of that energy that broke them up further?
I think it started a process that was not self-quenching. In other words, this unraveling. And it's my understanding that with the first nuclear bomb test, the scientists did not know if it would be self-quenching or if the reaction would continue and destroy the planet.
That's right, yeah.
And yet the ones who decided to go ahead with the test took that gamble.
That's just amazing when you think about that, isn't it?
Yeah. I guess there wouldn't be anyone left to, hold them accountable.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
And this, I wonder if, whoever planned this had the same kind of mentality. They didn't know if it would be self-quenching or not. And it's sort of slowed down over time. The process is great, but it definitely didn't stop. And this is, a lot of similarities with the Hutchison effect. And in John Hutchison's experience, he's found stuff that continues onward. Like he had a steel file that broke apart, and he turned the gizmo off. And the next day he came back, and the thing had degraded more and crumbled.
Yeah.
So it's like it affects it, and it continues like a snowball effect or a chain reaction.
That's right. It's one might think at first then that this is a very precise technique, but as you've showed in your book, Judy, this is something that apparently, well, potentially we say, because we don't know about the motive, at least I don't, and exactly what the goal was in terms of the destruction. Because we can see the kind of a Swiss cheese effect, if you will, in WTC 6, among other buildings. There's what I'm saying is that it might not have been that exactly precise. They might not have done so many tests, so to speak, beforehand, correct?
I think that Building 6 was part of the design, and same with Building 3. Those buildings were reduced in mass by, at least 50% of the mass from Building 6 was taken out.
Mm-hmm.
That leaves a much smaller chunk of building. It was a 6-story building. No, I'm sorry, an 8-story building. And if you take out that middle part, you have like two side buildings, small buildings, like a quarter of the size of the whole thing. And the smallest piece that was the furthest west was adjacent to the bathtub wall. And if you look at where that was, you'll see why it would be very beneficial to, like page 49, that chunk that was right up in that corner of the bathtub, when they took it down, they couldn't use bombs, dynamite or whatever to bring it down. They had to use cables to pull it down because they're afraid of damaging the bathtub wall.
Yeah, that's right. And if they would have done that, there would have been water rushing in at that point from the Hudson, correct?
Right. If you realize that the towers were built in the Hudson River, they were built on bedrock that was 70 feet below the water table. So they built this dike around and up to the old shoreline to keep the bathtub, they call it the bathtub, to keep the lower stories, the 70 feet below the water table, dry and like land.
Yep.
They're living below the water line. So if you drop the towers on it, you for sure break up the bathtub.
Would have damaged.
They're worried about
they're
worried about dropping just a 6-story piece of building on it. And the other piece that remained was just the south corner of Building 3. But the rest of Building 3 turned to dust, and it's right adjacent to the bathtub wall.
That's interesting. So that, in that sense, that might have been very precise. Is that what you're saying then?
Very precise, yep. And Building 3 is interesting. About half of it was turned to dust during the destruction of Tower 2, and the rest of it during Tower 1. In 2 stages.
See, I'm looking at the map as well that you have in the book, Judy, and why don't we talk a little bit about here, maybe this is a good point or a good place to do this, about Building 7 then, and your take on that. Give us your version of that, because we hear about the comments about the decision to pull that building, and we see it come down and so forth. What's your take on 7?
Well, it's not really a take on it. Again, you look at the evidence, and there's little to no seismic signature associated with that building. If you drop a building that size to the ground, it's going to leave a large seismic signal. And the MANY station, this is on page 87, the MANY station, you could not pick it out of background noise. As far as you knew, nothing happened. It was a non-event. And in the other stations, maybe you see a slightly higher frequency, but you can't be sure that what was happening, what caused that. And what was also peculiar, if you slam a building down to the ground, down to bedrock, it should be like hitting a tuning fork and send some signal ringing over to the seismic station through the ground. There's no primary wave or secondary wave associated with the demise of these buildings. Only surface waves.
That's interesting.
So if you slam the buildings down to bedrock, it's like hitting a tuning fork.
What would you you have a little comparison chart? Where do you think you would place a building coming down of the size of World Trade Center 1 and 2 on the Richter scale, Judy?
Well, just noting what size ones there have been. It'd be for towers 1 and 2 somewhere between a 3.2 and a 3.7.
Yeah.
Depends on how you do the comparison. And for Building 7, you should get somewhere between a 2.8 and a 2.9.
Interesting. And what do we have for Building 1 and 2, Judy?
For Tower 2, that was the first one that went. It was a 2.1, and Tower 1, it was a 2.3. Tower 1 is 30 times, that's 3 times 10, 30 times the potential energy of the King Dome. It's a bigger building, more mass, high above the ground. The King Dome was a 2.3. Building 7 was a 0.6.
Yeah, that's nothing. Yeah.
It's you kind of wonder if that was there was like it was a windowsill that fell on the ground. A little bit of an exaggeration, but not by much. The other interesting things is the time which it took. If you go to page 67, on the bottom seismic line, you'll see event 5 next to event 17.
Mm.
Event 5 is a vertical line through the chart just to show where it is. That was the demise of building 7. There's nothing there.
Mm.
There was an earthquake in the Fox Islands. That was event 17. You see something there. And up above, you see events 11, 12, 13, and so forth. Those were quarry blasts over New Jersey and beyond. Much further away.
Yeah.
And they were registered. They're just, stick of dynamite in a quarry. Well, probably a little bit more than a stick of dynamite, but something like that. They were quarry blasts. And so what happened with building 7, it was less than those quarry blasts, or even it didn't even register. So you start wondering if anything hit the ground. This is evidence. If you blow up a building, if you cut up the columns, however you take the building down, if that mass slams to the ground, you should have a seismic signal.
Yeah.
What this shows is that the mass did not slam to the ground. The building didn't burn up, nor did it slam to the ground, but turned into dust in midair. Dust doesn't make a thud when it hits.
And what do you think if there's a 2.1 from World Trade Center 2, and I think a 2.3 from World Trade Center 1, what would you attribute to that? Is that things on the bottom falling off or down? Because as we see, certain things have fallen into, World Trade Center 5, I think, and some things hit other buildings around. That's basically what I'm saying.
Not much. What happened to building 5, those are cylindrical holes. Things falling on it wouldn't leave cylindrical holes that are empty, with nothing in the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of like the middle of building 6. Nothing can make a hole that shape and leave nothing behind. Mm-hmm. But if you, just for comparison, let's say you turn the top 90 stories of building 1 into dust, blows away at the breeze. So you're only left with the bottom 20 stories, and drop that to the ground. You get approximately a 2.3 on the Richter scale.
And so is that pretty close to the scenario, do you think, of what happened?
It's not exact, where the cutoff is, but if you look around, like across the street, the Winter Garden, and WFC2 and WFC3, I call them stab wounds, with the beam going through the building.
Right.
You don't have any stab wounds really above the 18th floor. If you have a 110-story building coming apart, why don't you have chunks of steel stabbing other buildings above the 18th floor?
Yeah.
And there's only a few of them. It is also, if you for building, for Tower 2, it's like 16 floors that would make a 2.1, approximately. So this also supports the idea of a building turning to dust. And if you look at the duration of the seismic signals, the building shook. For building Tower 1, the ground shook for about 8 seconds. It takes like 9.5